going on? I'm going to be showing you how to make a training program for hypertrophy. If you're here for strength, you're in the wrong place. I'll be going over the fundamentals as well as some things I personally learned from training. So let's jump straight into it. So muscles generally take about 24 to 72 hours to recover after a training session. So you're going to want to leave adequate time between each training session of a muscle group to allow for recovery and allow the muscle to get bigger than last time. For example, push-pull legs. When you hit legs, it gives you 2 to 3 days of not hitting them to allow them to recover for that next session. So how many days a week should you be training and how frequently should you be training each muscle group? So some studies show that higher frequency of hitting a muscle group results in more muscle gains quicker. Meaning if you hit biceps twice or 3 times a week as compared to once, it's going to allow for more growth because it only takes about 24 hours for biceps, let's say, because they're a smaller muscle group to recover. Once those 24 hours is over, your muscle's ready to hit again and to grow more. So I'll use the same example of push-pull legs. Generally, push-pull legs goes push-pull legs, rest day, repeat, and then that'll be your week. So you're basically hitting every muscle twice in that week as compared to once. Now, my take on this is if you have the time to hit every muscle twice a week and go to the gym 6 or 7 times a week, then go for it. You'll be better off. But if you're on a time constraint, maybe you can't make it every day, you can also make training each muscle once a week work. For example, you can have a 4-day split and only hit it once a week. So let's say you do chest and shoulders, back, arms, legs, and then 3 days of rest. That works. But what you're going to want to do is on each of those training days, do more volume than you would have if you hit each muscle twice a week. So let's say you, instead of push-pull legs, where you'd hit chest for 8 total sets, 4 sets on the first push day and 4 sets on the second push day. Do 8 sets of chest on your chest and shoulder day of your 4-day split. Because the more volume you hit on a muscle, generally the longer it's going to take to recover. So because it's going to be a whole week until you hit chest again, you're going to want to hit more volume to allow for a longer loop of recovery, as well as be able to see more growth with not hitting it as frequently. Me personally, I haven't seen much of a difference between the 2 different types of frequencies of training. If there is, it's a marginal difference. So honestly, whatever works best in your schedule would be better for you. So what exercises should you be doing? For bigger muscles such as chest, back, and shoulders, you're going to need to do compound and isolation movements. And which one of those goes first depends on your split, and it's also situational. So generally, compounds should go first and then finish off by isolations and concentrate on getting blood flow into the muscle. I'm going to use chest as an example. So for a chest day, you may want to start off with doing incline dumbbell press. Maybe do another compound movement, and then finish off with a couple of isolations such as a pec fly or a cable cross. Now, why is that? Doing compounds first allows you to have the most energy in order to exert it on a heavy exercise. So you'll be able to do heavy compounds much better if you start off with them compared to starting off with an isolation where your chest is already now sore. You're not going to be able to do as much on incline dumbbell because you already hit chest a little bit. Let me give an example of what I did in my previous training split of how I organized compounds and isolations. So I was doing the Arnold split, which is chest and back, shoulders and arms, legs, repeat, and then a rest day. What I did on chest and back day 1 is I would start with a compound chest movement and then move to an isolation. But for my second chest and back day, I did an isolation first, and then I did a compound. When I hit arms, it's 2 days before my second chest and back day. And as you know, if you've gone to the gym before, the second day after hitting a muscle group is usually when it feels the most sore. So when I hit triceps 2 days before my second chest and back day, my triceps are still extremely sore. So when I hit an isolation movement before my compound that day, it allows me to completely burn out my chest prior to hitting the compound. So my chest is the limiting factor on the compound movement, not my triceps from being hit 2 days ago. And then I'll make my rest day after that split, chest and back day 2, shoulders and arms day 2, legs day 2. I'll have that rest day there because it'll allow me to hit the compounds first on that chest and back day 1 again. So now what exercises should you be picking? So I already said you need to pick a variety of compound and isolations. Now, to some degree, it's whatever you may feel the most activation on. I'm gonna keep using chest as an example. So generally speaking, a converging machine press will activate your chest the most, and then a Smith machine press, and then a dumbbell press, and then a barbell press. But just because a converging machine press has shown to have the most chest activation, it doesn't mean that's the only thing you should do. Out of any of those, whichever one you find the most burn, let's say, or activation, hit that exercise. An exercise for me that I may feel the most in my chest may be completely different than the exercise that you may feel hits your chest the best. As long as you're mixing in both compound and isolation movements, it doesn't matter as long as you're hitting the muscle. So how should you be performing those exercises? Studies show hitting a muscle in a lengthened position and a controlled eccentric allows for the best stimulation for a muscle. Let me show you for a bicep curl for the example. When you're hitting a bicep curl, when you lengthen it, this is the lengthened position when my arm is fully extended out and the bicep is completely stretched. When you allow for each rep to hit the bottom of the movement in this lengthened position, that is where you'll see the most growth. As compared to, let's say I only did bicep curls from the contracted part of the movement to only, let's say, halfway down. You'll see more growth just from going from the lengthened position halfway up than you would from halfway up to all the way up. But you're going to want to do a full range of motion just to hit the muscle completely, is from the lengthened all the way up to the contracted. And you're going to want to squeeze at the top of each movement. For a bicep curl, squeeze at the top, make sure you're hitting the bicep. Same goes for a chest press when you're at the top of the movement. Squeeze your chest, make sure you're getting a proper contraction of the muscle, and control the eccentric, meaning this is the eccentric part of the movement, this is the concentric part of the movement. Eccentric is dropping the weight down, concentric is contracting the weight, as in the harder part of the movement. So when you contract the weight, you're not going to want to just let it drop to the bottom, because there's also muscle growth in letting the weight come down and controlling it down. Your muscle's still getting hit from here to here. Doesn't mean you have to hold it for 10 seconds going down. As long as you control it and you can feel it the whole way going down and then go back up for the next rep, it doesn't matter if it's 1 second or 5 seconds that it takes you to go through the eccentric. Now, next is how to progressive overload. So how I organize the weight or reps I'm going to do on my next training session for a muscle group is based off the rep range and how I did in the previous session. Let's say I'm doing bench press and I'm benching 135 for 12 reps. That's what I got last time on my first set. Next time, I'm going to up the weight by 5 pounds on each side and see how many I can get that session. So let's say I only get 10 reps now with the extra 5 pounds is 145 on the bar. I'm going to want to keep that weight until I get 12 reps with that weight. And then once I get 12 reps with the new weight, then I'll add 5 more pounds on. So it's a combination of upping the weight as well as upping your reps. So I'll generally, depending on what the movement is, if it's a compound or isolation, I'll set a benchmark somewhere between 8 or 12 reps that once I hit that benchmark of reps, then I'll up the weight by 5 pounds on each side, or per arm, let's say. So once I hit 12, I'll up at 5, and maybe next time I'll only get 8 reps. So I'll stick with that weight until I get up to 12 reps, then I'll up the weight again. That's progressive overload. Now, for progressive overloading, in addition to progressive overloading, there's also a study on reps in reserve, also known as RIR. Studies show that having 1 to 3 reps in reserve per each set is better for hypertrophy than going to failure on each set. An analogy I heard was, let's say I offered you $50,000 a week for the next 6 weeks. You can either take that or get $100,000 just right now. That's the difference between training in 1 to 3 reps in reserve and going to failure. Going to failure is just getting the $100,000 right away. Sure, you may get more growth, but you're not going to be able to get bit by bit for the next 6 weeks. Now, my take on that is I personally don't train with reps in reserve. I train to failure on each set because trying to do the math on finding exactly how many reps in reserve you have per each set is a pain in the ass. If you're mid-set and you're trying to figure out if you have 1 rep left or if you have 5 reps left, it's pretty difficult to figure out how much you actually have left without going through the movement. By going to failure each time, it's an objective way to know that you actually hit 0 reps in reserve instead of trying to figure out where is 1 to 3 reps in reserve. Now, because I do go to failure for each set, you're going to want to not do as many sets per muscle group per the week, because going to failure on each set is pretty fatiguing, and cutting back on the volume allows you to go to failure on each set without limiting the recovery for the next session. Next thing is when to deload. So what is a deload? A deload is where you take a designated week of either cutting back on the weight or the reps you do per set to allow your body to recover, because there's more to recovery than just your muscles. Your muscles are controlled by your CNS, which is your central nervous system in your brain. And throughout a training program, your muscles will get fatigued but will recover by the next training session, but your CNS will get fatigued progressively and it needs its own little block to be able to recover. So a deload is essentially taking off the weight and reps for a week to allow your CNS to recover, to be able to hit new benchmarks of weight and progression. So for beginners between 0 to 2 years of training, you're probably not going to need any deload, and you'll probably feel just fine. I was fine for the first 2 to 3 years, let's say 2 years, without taking a single deload, and I was still able to progress. Now, intermediates, let's say from 3 to 7 years, you're gonna need to take deloads. Depending on how many years you've been training, you may not need as frequent of deloads. So let's say you've been training for 3 years, you may need a deload week between 8 and 12 weeks of training. Now, let's say you've been training for 5 years, you may need a deload between 4 and 6 weeks of training. So it's all relative based off of how much weight you're pushing, because once you get to the more intermediate to advanced levels, when you're pushing heavier weight, it's way more taxing on your CNS than it was when you first started working out. So the best way to know when to deload is not based off of a certain week of training, it's based off of your progression in training. If you go 2 consecutive training sessions without upping weight or reps in any of your movements, more likely than not, you need to take a deload. With that being said, if your sleep, eating, training, or stress that week was off from your normal, then take another session to see if you progress in weight, because maybe one of those was the reason why you didn't up your weight that session and not because you need a deload. So next is adjusting your sets for the next mesocycle. So what is a mesocycle? A mesocycle is your designated training split duration. So you have a split set up and it's designed to be somewhere between 4 and 12 weeks. Whenever you hit that point where you need to take the deload week. Once you take that deload week, your next training split is your next mesocycle. Now, generally, you want to keep the same exercises you had from your previous split in your next mesocycle, but add a few more sets or a couple more sets depending on your recoverability to that next mesocycle. So once you do that 4 times, your body's going to be completely taxed. And then you're going to need to take a few weeks just off from training. And then once you take those few weeks off, you'll be back to square one, having lower amount of volume per mesocycle, and then rinse and repeat. So that's everything for training. You also need to adjust your macros. Your protein intake daily should be about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Studies show that that's actually plenty. It's actually more than you need. You only need about 0.7 grams per pound of body weight, but just to make sure, you can do 1 gram per pound. And if you really want to make sure, you can do 1.25 grams per pound of body weight. And just make sure you're getting some sources of high quality protein in there, such as actual meat, and not getting protein from, let's say, vegan sources. Another important thing is pre-workout carbs. Before your workout, you're going to want to have some source of carbs. The amount that you have depends on how close you are to your training. So if you're training in like 15 minutes from now, you may not want to have a giant bowl of pasta because you're just going to feel lethargic during your workout. You may just want to have a banana. But let's say you're working out an hour from now. Maybe you could throw in that bowl of pasta then because it should be digested by the time you work out. For bulking, you're going to want to have a 250 to 500 calorie surplus per day. I prefer to be closer to the 500 mark, where I'm averaging about a pound a week body weight gain, compared to 250 where I may not be certain I'm actually progressing. I may just be spinning my wheels in place. So how I up my calories during those mesocycles that I discussed is first, before any of those mesocycles start, I'll look up TDEE calculator online, which is total daily energy expenditure online, plug in all my stats, and it'll spit out a number, a rough estimate of how many calories a day I need to eat in order to maintain my body weight. So from there, I'll tack on 500 calories. I'll track my weight every morning after I wake up, and after 3 weeks of tracking, I'll calculate what my average weight gain was out of those 3 weeks, and then I'll adjust my calories accordingly. So if I'm only gaining a quarter pound a week, then I'm going to up my calories another 500 to make sure I'm gaining at least a pound a week. And vice versa if you're trying to cut, meaning a 250 to 500 calorie deficit. Next is cardio. You're still going to be doing cardio when you're bulking. Few sessions a week is required because your cardiovascular health is important when you're trying to bulk. Your body naturally wants to stay at homeostasis, which means it doesn't fluctuate its weight at all. So you going on a bulk is basically disrupting homeostasis in your body. Your body's processing more food than it wants. It's important to keep everything healthy when you're disrupting your body and just in general. So cardio helps with your cardiovascular health. And also when you're doing higher rep sets, such as, let's say you're doing 12 reps of barbell squat. When you get to those higher reps, like the 12th rep, you're going to feel like you're passing out if you're not doing cardio during your bulk. So doing cardio will allow you to hit those higher rep sets without your lungs being the limiting factor. So I personally do 4 cardio sessions a week, and I base them on my non-leg days. So I'll walk on the treadmill on my chest and back day, my shoulder and arm day, and not my leg day. I like to not put it on my leg days because once I hit a big leg workout, doing cardio becomes way more difficult because my legs are already destroyed from leg day. Now, what type of cardio should you be doing? You should be doing zone 1 cardio. What zone 1 cardio is, you're at a heart rate of 50 to 60% of your maximum heart rate. So what your max heart rate is 220 minus your age. That's your maximum heart rate. So divide that by 2, whatever treadmill you go on, go check like the sensors on it, or hold on to the handles, the metal pieces, and it'll give you like a ballpark estimate of what your heart rate is when you're doing the exercise. So I walk on the treadmill, 0 incline at about 3.5 miles per hour, and my beats per minute is about 105, which is pretty close to about 50% of my max heart rate. And I'll do that for 30 minutes for the 4 sessions in the week. It's very easy once you get into a routine of it. Last thing I got is sleep. Just make sure you're getting at least 7 hours a night. You may need even more, but 7 hours is the benchmark of what you need to be having each night in order to grow. Because sleep is the primary time where your muscles actually recover and grow. So that's all I got for you guys. Next time I'll be going over how many sets you should be doing exactly per muscle. I'll leave it off there. See you guys next time.